They locked the human up. The cubs dug through stone until they reached her cell, the capture and the promise. The twin suns of Narration 7 burned overhead as Dr. Sarah Chen knelt in the red dirt, showing 6 small Valkyrie cubs how to test soil acidity. The cubs crowded around her, their silvery fur catching the light, their large amber eyes watching her every movement with intense focus. Sarah smiled as she demonstrated the simple chemical test, watching the litmus paper change color. "See how it turns blue?" she said gently. "That means the soil is too alkaline for the crops we want to grow."
"We need to add sulfur to balance it." Kiva, the oldest cub at barely 4 seasons, tilted her head.
"How much sulfur, Miss Sarah?" "Good question. We calculate based on the soil volume." Sarah sketched numbers in the dirt with her finger. "If we have this much soil, we need this much sulfur." "Does that make sense?" The cubs nodded eagerly. They had been working with Sarah for 6 months now, ever since she arrived at the refugee settlement on this remote mining colony. The Valkyrie had lost their homeworld when the Krithian Dominion expanded its borders, swallowing their system without warning or negotiation. These cubs and their families had fled with nothing, arriving at Narration 7 with empty hands and emptier stomachs. Sarah had volunteered to help them establish sustainable agriculture. The work was difficult in the asteroid colony's controlled environment, but she loved every moment. The Valkyrie people were kind and eager to learn, and the cubs especially had stolen her heart. Zeph and Nix, the twin brothers, were always competing to see who could dig faster. Sarah limped slightly from an injury sustained during the evacuation, but she never complained and worked twice as hard as anyone else. Whisper rarely spoke, but his observations were always insightful, and Bounce lived up to his name, bouncing with enthusiasm at every new discovery. "Miss Sarah, look," Bounce called out, pointing to a sprout pushing through the soil. "The grain seeds are growing." Sarah walked over and examined the young plant. "You're right. This is wonderful. You all did excellent work preparing this bed. In a few months, you'll have your first harvest." The cubs chittered with excitement, their tails swishing. Kiva approached Sarah and reached up to take her hand. "Thank you for teaching us, Miss Sarah. Before you came, we didn't know how to make food grow. We were always hungry." Sarah squeezed the small paw gently. "You're doing all the hard work. I'm just sharing what I know, and you're all such fast learners. I'm proud of you." The moment was interrupted by a sound that made Sarah's blood run cold, the deep rumble of military engines. She looked up and saw 3 angular warships descending from the sky, their dark hulls marked with the crimson symbols of the Krithian Dominion. "Get to your homes," Sarah said quickly, her voice urgent but calm. "Go now, stay inside until I come for you." "But Miss Sarah," Kiva began. "Now please, I'll be fine." Sarah forced a smile she didn't feel. The cubs scattered, running toward the small shelters that made up the refugee settlement. Sarah stood alone in the field as the warships landed, their landing gear crushing the carefully tended crops. Dust billowed in all directions, and Sarah shielded her eyes. Soldiers emerged from the ships. The Krethians were imposing beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall with scaled skin that shimmered in shades of deep green and bronze. They moved with predatory grace, their vertical pupil eyes scanning the settlement with cold efficiency. Each carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. A commander stepped forward, his scales darker than the others with silver markings denoting high rank. "Dr. Sarah Chen?" "Yes, can I help you?" Sarah kept her voice steady. "You are under arrest for espionage against the Krethian Dominion, unauthorized intelligence gathering, and conspiracy to aid rebel factions." Sarah's heart hammered. "That's absurd. I'm an agricultural specialist with the Federation Science Corps. I'm here on a humanitarian mission. Check your records." "We have checked our records. You have been operating in proximity to military installations, conducting surveillance under the guise of agricultural work, and maintaining contact with known insurgents." "I've been teaching refugees how to grow food. I haven't been anywhere near military installations." The commander's expression didn't change. "The Valkyrie are classified as hostile aliens by the Dominion. Providing them aid is considered support of enemy combatants. You will come with us." 2 soldiers grabbed Sarah's arms. She didn't resist physically, knowing it would be useless, but she raised her voice. "This is neutral territory. The Federation has agreements with the Dominion. You can't just— The agreements are under review. This colony now falls under Dominion jurisdiction." The commander gestured, and the soldiers began pulling Sarah toward the nearest ship. From the windows of the shelters, small faces watched, Sarah could see the cubs peering out, their eyes wide with fear. She caught Kiva's gaze and mouthed the words, "Stay safe." Then she was dragged up the ramp and into the ship's cold interior. They locked her in a holding cell barely larger than a closet. The ship lifted off immediately, the acceleration pushing Sarah against the wall. Through the small viewport, she watched Narration 7 shrink below, the refugee settlement becoming invisible. She pressed her palm against the cold metal, wondering if she would ever see those cubs again. The journey to the trial took 5 days. Sarah was transferred between ships twice, each time locked in progressively smaller cells. No one would answer her questions. Her requests to contact the Federation were ignored. She existed in a limbo of uncertainty, fed tasteless rations and given no information. Finally, they brought her to a courtroom. It was a vast chamber hewn from dark volcanic rock, the ceiling soaring high above. Hundreds of Krethians filled tiered seating, watching her with reptilian eyes. Sarah was placed in a circle of harsh white light at the chamber's center, made to stand alone while voices echoed around her. The judge was ancient. His scales faded to gray, his movements slow but deliberate. He read the charges in the Krethian language first, the sibilant words incomprehensible to Sarah. Then he switched to standard Galactic. The human-designated Sarah Chen faces charges of espionage, territorial violations, and providing material support to enemy combatants. How does the accused respond? Sarah stood as tall as she could. Not guilty. I am a civilian scientist engaged in humanitarian work. The Velkari refugees are not combatants. They're families trying to survive. I was teaching children how to grow food. That's not a crime. Under Dominion law, all Velkari are classified as enemy aliens. Any assistance provided to them constitutes support of hostile forces. Then your law is unjust. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The judge's eyes narrowed. You admit to providing this assistance? I admit to helping hungry children learn to feed themselves. If that's illegal in your empire, then I proudly stand guilty. The trial proceeded without her input mattering. Witnesses testified to seeing her in restricted areas, though Sarah had never left the refugee settlement. Evidence was presented showing communication with rebel cells, though she had only sent routine reports to her research supervisors. Every fact was twisted, every innocent action reframed as sinister. The verdict came within 2 hours. Guilty on all charges, the human will be sentenced to indefinite imprisonment at Deephold Prison. This sentence is final and without appeal. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. Deephold Prison was legendary throughout known space. It was not a building or a station, but an entire asteroid converted into a maximum security facility. Prisoners went in and never came out. It held the most dangerous criminals in the Dominion, beings guilty of mass murder, terrorism, planetary destruction. And now it would hold one human who had taught alien children how to grow vegetables. They transported her in a prison ship, locked in a cell with 20 other prisoners. None were human. Most avoided her, but an elderly Thraxian with 4 arms and wise eyes spoke to her once. You are young to be sent to Deephold. What was your crime? I helped some refugee children, Sarah said quietly. The Thraxian made a sound like grinding stones. The Dominion does not value kindness. Neither does the universe most days, but perhaps that makes kindness more important, not less. 3 weeks later, they arrived. Deephold Prison loomed before them, a massive asteroid bristling with weapons platforms and shield generators. The prison ship docked at a fortified port, and prisoners were marched through decontamination chambers and processing stations. Sarah was stripped of her clothes, given a gray uniform, and assigned a number. They scanned her, photographed her, took samples of her DNA. Every step removed another piece of her identity until she felt like nothing more than inventory being cataloged. The guards led her deep into the asteroid. The corridors were rough stone, barely finished, lit by dim lights at irregular intervals. They descended through level after level, going deeper into the rock. The air grew colder. The weight of stone above pressed down on Sarah's consciousness. Finally, they stopped at a massive door made of reinforced metal. A guard entered a long code, and mechanisms ground open. Beyond was a corridor lined with cell doors, each one identical and featureless. They stopped at cell 247. The guard opened the door, revealing a small chamber carved from solid rock. 10 feet by 10 feet with walls 3 feet thick. A sleeping platform jutted from one wall. A waste facility occupied one corner. Nothing else. No window, no screen, no decoration of any kind inside, the guard commanded. Sarah stepped through the threshold. The door slammed behind her with terrible finality. Locks engaged with heavy clicks that echoed in the tiny space. Then silence, complete, absolute silence and darkness. The cell had no light of its own. When the door closed, the darkness was total and overwhelming. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes straining uselessly. She could not see her hand in front of her face, could not see the walls or the ceiling. The darkness pressed against her like a physical weight. She felt her way to the sleeping platform and sat down, back against the stone wall. The rock was cold even through her uniform. She pulled her knees to her chest and sat in the darkness, trying not to panic. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the dark. Eventually, a slot in the door opened and a food tray slid through, bringing brief light before the slot closed again. Sarah ate in darkness, the food tasteless. She found her way to the waste facility when needed. She lay on the sleeping platform and stared at nothing. This was her life now. This darkness, this silence, this isolation. She was buried alive inside an asteroid with no hope of rescue. The Federation didn't know where she was. Even if they did, they couldn't reach her here. Deephold Prison was impregnable. Sarah pressed her face against the cold stone and allowed herself to cry. She cried for her lost freedom, for the work she would never finish, for the life she had planned that would never happen. But most of all, she cried for 6 small cubs who had lost someone who cared about them. She hoped they would be okay. She hoped someone else would teach them. She hoped they would remember her kindly. What Sarah didn't know, couldn't know in that moment of despair, was that those 6 cubs had no intention of forgetting her. They had watched her capture from the shelter windows. They had heard the adults say she was gone forever, taken to a place from which no one returned. They had heard the resignation in the adults' voices, the acceptance of loss, and they had rejected it completely. In their small shelter, Kiva gathered the others in a tight circle. "Miss Sarah saved us," she whispered. "She taught us how to feed ourselves. She made us feel like we mattered, and now she needs us. The adults say she's in Deephold Prison," Zeph said. "They say it's impossible to reach." "Impossible is just a word," Kiva replied. "Miss Sarah taught us that. She taught us to solve problems, to find solutions, to never give up. So what do we do?" Sarah asked, her injured leg tucked beneath her. Kiva's amber eyes burned with determination. "We go get her. We find Deephold Prison and we bring Miss Sarah home." "We're just cubs," Whisper said softly. "How can we—" "Miss Sarah is just one human," Kiva interrupted. "One human who crossed the galaxy to help aliens she'd never met. If she can do that, we can do this." Bounce stood up, his tail held high. "I'm going. Miss Sarah needs us." One by one, the others stood, Nix and Zeph together. Sarah, despite her injured leg, even quiet Whisper rose to his feet. "Then it's decided," Kiva said. "We prepare. We learn everything we can. And when we're ready, we go. We bring Miss Sarah home no matter what it takes." The 6 cubs pressed their small paws together in the center of their circle, making a promise that would take them across the galaxy and through solid stone. They had no idea if they could succeed. They only knew they had to try, because that's what Miss Sarah would have done for them, the impossible journey. The cubs spent 3 days preparing in secret. They knew the adults would never approve of their plan. The Velkari elders were too broken by loss, too cautious after losing their homeworld. They would call the cubs foolish and dangerous. They would try to stop them out of love and fear. So Kiva and the others worked in silence and shadows. They stole food from the communal storage, taking only small amounts that wouldn't be missed immediately. Preserved protein bars, dried fruit, containers of water. They hid everything in a maintenance tunnel beneath their shelter. Zeph, who had always been fascinated by technology, managed to repair an old data pad someone had thrown away. The screen was cracked and half the functions didn't work, but the navigation system still functioned. He spent hours studying star charts tracing the route to Deephold Prison. "It's far," he told the others, his voice worried. "We'd need to travel through at least 4 different sectors. We'd have to cross from neutral space into Dominion territory." "How far exactly?" Kiva asked. "If we had our own ship, maybe 6 weeks at standard speed. But we don't have a ship." "Then we find one," Kiva said simply. "Or we stow away on ships that are already going that direction." Nick studied the datapad over his brother's shoulder. "The commercial freighters go everywhere. If we can get to the main spaceport and hide on a cargo ship, We could travel the first part of the journey. And then what? Sarah asked. We can't just ride one ship all the way to a prison asteroid. No, Kiva agreed. But we ride ships as far as they go, then find another ship going further. We keep doing that until we reach Deephold. That could take months, Whisper said quietly. Then it takes months. Kiva's voice was firm. Miss Sarah is worth it. The hardest part was leaving without saying goodbye. The cubs knew if they told anyone, even their parents, they would be stopped. But leaving without explanation felt like betrayal. Kiva solved this by writing a simple message on a scrap of salvaged paper. We go to help Miss Sarah, we come back with her. Trust us. Love, Kiva, Zeph, Nix, Sarah, Whisper, and Bounce. She left the note in their shelter where it would be found in the morning. Then when both of Narax's 7 small moons were hidden behind the bulk of a nearby asteroid, the 6 cubs slipped away from the refugee settlement. They walked through the darkness, following the maintenance tunnels that connected different sections of the colony. Their night vision was excellent, inherited from ancestors who had hunted in the twilight forests of their lost homeworld. They moved silently, their padded feet making no sound on the metal floors. The journey to the main spaceport took 4 hours. It was located in a different section of the colony, far from the refugee area. Commercial traffic came and went constantly, freighters carrying ore from the mining operations, passenger ships bringing workers, supply vessels delivering everything the colony needed. The cubs hid behind cargo containers at the edge of the port, watching the activity. Ships landed and took off with regular frequency. Workers moved about with practiced efficiency, loading and unloading containers with the help of mechanical loaders. We need to find a ship going toward the inner systems, Zeph said, checking his data pad. That's the general direction of Deephold. They watched and waited. Sarah's leg ached from the long walk, but she didn't complain. Bounce had wanted to run and play, his natural energy barely containable, but the others had convinced him to stay still and quiet. Even Whisper, usually so reserved, kept scanning the area with alert eyes. Finally, Nix pointed to a large freighter being loaded with processed ore. That one. I heard the workers say it's heading to the Mactheon refinery. That's 2 sectors closer to where we need to go. The cubs watched the loading process carefully. The cargo containers were massive, each one large enough to hold hundreds of tons of ore. Mechanical loaders lifted them into the ship's cargo bay through the stern loading doors. The workers took breaks every 30 minutes, gathering near a small shelter to rest and drink water. When they take their next break, Kiva whispered, we run. We get into the cargo bay and find a place to hide. What if they see us? Sarah asked. Then we run faster. They waited tensely. The workers continued loading containers, shouting instructions to each other. A loader malfunctioned, causing a 10-minute delay while repairs were made. Finally, the workers set down their tools and walked toward the shelter for their break. Now, Kiva hissed. The 6 cubs burst from cover, running as fast as their legs could carry them across the open ground. They were small enough that they stayed below the sight lines of most equipment. Just 6 gray blurs racing across the tarmac. Bounce nearly tripped but caught himself. Sarah gritted her teeth against the pain in her leg and kept pace. They reached the freighter's loading ramp and scrambled inside. The cargo bay was enormous, filled with rows of secured containers. The cubs ran between them, searching for a hiding place. They found a container near the back that was only half full, its door still open for additional loading. In here, Kiva said, and they all climbed inside. The container held machinery parts packed in protective foam. The cubs squeezed themselves into gaps between the equipment, making themselves as small as possible. Zeph positioned himself near the door where he could see out through a small gap. They heard voices as the workers returned from break. The loading continued. More containers were brought aboard and secured. Eventually, workers came to their container. The cubs held their breath as the door was pulled shut, leaving only the small gap where Zeph watched. This one's light, a worker said. Barely half capacity. Ship it anyway. They're behind schedule. The container was sealed and lifted. The cubs felt themselves rising, swinging through the air, then being set down with a thump. They heard mechanical clamps engaging, locking the container in place. More sounds of loading, then finally the massive cargo bay doors grinding shut. Engines hummed to life, sending vibrations through the ship's hull. The cubs held onto each other as the freighter lifted off, the acceleration pushing them against the back wall of the container. The pressure built, making it hard to breathe, then gradually eased as the ship left the asteroid's gravity well. They were in space. They were actually doing this. For 2 weeks, the cubs lived in that container. They ate their rations slowly, making the food last. 1 protein bar shared among 6 had to sustain them for a full day. Water was rationed even more carefully. They gave Whisper slightly larger portions because he was youngest and still growing, though he protested this special treatment. The worst part was the cold. Space was frigid, and the cargo bay wasn't heated to comfortable temperatures. The cubs huddled together for warmth, their fur providing some insulation. At night, when they shivered too much to sleep, they would tell stories. Kiva recounted the tales her grandmother had told her about the old homeworld. Zeph described the machines he would build someday. Sarah sang quiet songs. Even Whisper contributed, his soft voice sharing observations about the stars and space. They talked about Miss Sarah, too. Remembered her patience when teaching them, the way she always had time for their questions, how she had learned their names immediately and never confused them with other cubs. The small gifts she'd brought them, nothing valuable but thoughtfully chosen. A smooth stone for Bounce because he liked to throw things, a broken circuit board for Zeph to study, a colored ribbon for Sarah. She saw us, Kiva said one night as they huddled in the darkness. Not just saw us as refugees or aliens. She saw us as individuals, as people who mattered. The adults say humans are strange, Nick said, that they get attached to other species in ways that don't make sense. Maybe that's their strength, Whisper suggested quietly. Maybe caring when it doesn't make sense is what makes humans special. When the freighter finally docked at the Macthian refinery, the cubs waited until all sounds of unloading had ceased. Then they carefully opened their container from the inside, using Zeph's knowledge of locking mechanisms. They slipped out into the cargo bay, now mostly empty, and found their way to a maintenance access tunnel. The refinery was massive, a station built around a small moon, processing ore from a dozen different mining colonies. Ships came and went constantly. The cubs lived in the maintenance tunnels for 5 days, stealing food from worker cafeterias and studying ship schedules. They learned to move like ghosts, unseen and unheard. When security drones passed on patrol, they froze in shadows. When workers came through for inspections, they hid in ventilation shafts. Sarah's injured leg made climbing difficult, but the others helped her, sometimes carrying her when necessary. Finally, they found another ship heading deeper into Dominion space, a passenger liner this time, much larger and more luxurious than the ore freighter. The cubs snuck aboard during the confusion of passenger loading, hiding in the cargo hold among luggage and supplies. This ship was warmer and better maintained, but also more dangerous. Security was tighter. The cubs had to be more careful, moving only when they were certain no one would see them. They found a storage closet near the engineering section and made it their temporary home, venturing out only to find food and water. Bounce got caught once, discovered by a cleaning crew member. But the Velkari cub was small and quick, darting through the woman's legs and disappearing into a ventilation shaft before she could raise an alarm. The crew member reported seeing some kind of small animal, but no serious search was mounted. This became their pattern for 3 months. Travel on a ship, hide until it docked, find the next ship going closer to their destination. They stowed away on freighters, passenger liners, cargo haulers, and once even a military transport, though that was terrifying, and they barely avoided discovery multiple times. The journey changed them. Kiva became harder, more focused, the weight of leadership aging her beyond her years. Zeph and Nyx grew thinner, their youthful energy replaced by grim determination. Sarah's leg never healed properly, the injury worsening without proper medical care, but she refused to slow down. Whisper spoke even less than before, his silence becoming almost complete. Bounce lost his bounce, his playful nature subdued by hardship, but they kept going. When Nyx caught a fever and spent 3 days delirious in a cargo hold, the others nursed him through it. When Kiva nearly gave up after their food ran out for 6 days, Sarah reminded her of Miss Sarah's words. When things seem impossible, that's when humans try anyway. When Bounce cried at night missing his parents, they all held him until he fell asleep. They became more than cubs. They became a family united by purpose. Each one knew the others would die before abandoning the mission. That bond, forged through months of hardship, became stronger than steel. Finally, after 14 weeks of travel, they reached the sector where Deephold Prison was located. They stowed away on a supply ship making a delivery to the prison itself. As they hid in a crate of cleaning supplies, they could see through gaps in the container as the massive asteroid came into view. Deephold Prison was terrifying up close. The asteroid was 10 miles in diameter, its surface studded with weapons platforms and shield generators. Patrol ships circled it constantly. Guard towers bristled from the surface. This was a fortress designed to be impregnable, to keep the worst criminals in the galaxy contained. And somewhere inside, Miss Sarah was buried in stone and darkness. "How do we get in?" Nix whispered, staring at the fortress. Kiva studied the asteroid through the gap. The surface was scarred with craters and natural caves from ancient asteroid impacts. Most were sealed or monitored, but on the far side, away from the main docking facilities, she could see darker areas where the stone was rougher, less finished. "We don't go through the front door," she said slowly. "We go through the stone itself. We dig," the others stared at her. "Dig?" Sarah repeated. "Through solid rock? We're cubs, Kiva, we can't—" "Our ancestors could," Kiva interrupted. "On the homeworld, before we built cities, our people lived in burrows. We dug through stone. Our claws are designed for it. It's in our blood." "That would take forever," Zeph said. "Months, maybe years. Then we dig for months." Kiva's voice was absolute. "We didn't come this far to stop now." When the supply ship docked, the cubs slipped away during unloading. They made their way across the asteroid's surface using natural cover and the irregular terrain to avoid sensors. They reached the far side, where ancient lava tubes had carved passages through the rock. The caves were dark and cold, but they provided access to the asteroid's interior. The cubs descended into the darkness, following narrow passages that twisted deep into the stone. Finally, they found a dead end, a wall of solid rock that, according to Zeph's calculations, should lead toward the prison cells if they dug straight through. "This is it," Kiva said. "This is where we start." The 6 cubs pressed their paws against the stone wall. Their claws, which could extend and retract, slid out to full length. The tips were harder than they looked, designed by evolution to dig through packed earth and soft stone. "For Miss Sarah," Kiva said. "For Miss Sarah," the others echoed, and then they began to dig. 6 small cubs with nothing but determination and love started carving a tunnel through solid rock toward an impossible goal. They worked in shifts, 3 digging while 3 rested. The sound of claws on stone filled the cave, a steady scratching that would continue for months. Inside her cell, Sarah had lost count of the days. She existed in a timeless void of darkness and silence. She exercised to maintain sanity, running in place, doing push-ups, stretching. She recited poetry and solved math problems. She sang songs, her voice the only sound in the endless dark. And then one day she heard something else, a scratching sound, so faint she thought she'd imagined it. But the next day she heard it again, rhythmic, persistent, coming from the back wall of her cell. Sarah pressed her ear against the cold stone and listened. The sound was definitely there. Something was moving on the other side of the wall. Her heart began to race with something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She grabbed her metal food tray and tapped it against the wall. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. An old distress signal from Earth. The scratching stopped. Sarah held her breath. Then it resumed, faster and more intense than before. Someone was coming for her. She didn't know who or how, but someone was digging through solid stone to reach her cell. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face in the darkness. She wasn't forgotten. She wasn't alone. She began helping from her side, using the edge of the food tray to chip away at the stone. The metal wasn't effective, but she worked with desperate energy. Every scrape brought her closer to freedom, closer to whoever was coming for her. And on the other side of that stone wall, 6 cubs dug with bleeding paws and unbreakable hearts, refusing to give up, refusing to stop, refusing to leave their friend buried in the dark. The breakthrough and escape 3 months after the cubs began digging, the tunnel had extended 40 feet into solid rock. Their paws were permanently scarred from the work, the pads thick with calluses, the claws worn down and regrown dozens of times. They had long since run out of food, surviving on water stolen from maintenance systems and the occasional scraps they could find. Sarah could no longer walk on her injured leg. The joint had deteriorated over the months, the bone setting wrong without proper medical care. The others took turns carrying her during their journeys to find water, But during digging shifts, she worked from a sitting position, using her good leg and both arms to claw at the stone. Whisper had developed a chronic cough from breathing stone dust for so long. His small chest heaved with every breath, a rattling sound that worried the others, but he refused to stop working. When Kiva suggested he rest more, he simply shook his head and returned to the wall. Bounce had grown thin, his ribs visible through his fur. The energetic cub who had once bounded everywhere now moved slowly, conserving energy. But his spirit remained unbroken. He sang while he dug, old songs from the homeworld, his voice reedy but determined. Zeph's right paw had been injured when a section of tunnel collapsed. 2 of his claws had been torn out at the root. They had grown back, but the paw was weaker now, more prone to bleeding. He compensated by using his left paw more, working twice as hard to make up for the deficit. Nix had taken on the role of tunnel engineer, shoring up weak sections with rocks and makeshift supports. He had an intuitive understanding of structural integrity, somehow knowing which sections would hold and which might collapse. His constant vigilance had saved them from being buried alive more than once. And Kiva, who had started this impossible journey, carried the weight of every hardship the others endured. She saw Sarah's pain, heard Whisper's cough, watched Bounce fade, and knew it was her decision that had brought them here. But she also remembered Miss Sarah's face, her kindness, her patience. That memory drove her forward when everything else screamed to give up. The stone changed as they went deeper. The natural asteroid rock gave way to processed material, reinforced stone that the prison builders had used to construct the cells. This was harder, much harder. Progress slowed from inches per day to fractions of inches. The cub's claws broke against it, bleeding paws painting the stone red. "We're close," Zeph said one day, checking his calculations. "If I'm right about the prison layout, Miss Sarah's cell should be only a few more feet ahead." "A few feet might as well be miles," Nick said tiredly. "This processed stone is nearly impossible to dig through." "Then we find a way," Kiva said. "We always find a way." Inside her cell, Sarah had been listening to the scratching for 3 months. She had been helping from her side, chipping away with her food tray until the metal bent and broke. Now she used the broken edge, which was sharper, scraping at the stone until her hands bled. She talked to the diggers through the wall, not knowing if they could hear her words but hoping her voice carried through the stone. She told them stories about Earth, described the oceans and forests, the animals and cities. She recited poetry and sang songs. She wanted whoever was coming for her to know they weren't digging alone. The scratching had become faster recently, more urgent. Sarah matched the pace, working until exhaustion forced her to rest. The food the guards delivered once per day was barely enough to sustain her, but she ate every scrap, knowing she needed strength. And then, one day, she felt the stone move beneath her scraping. A small piece broke away, creating a hole no bigger than her thumb. Light flickered on the other side, weak but there. Sarah pressed her face to the hole and looked through. A golden amber eye stared back at her. "Miss Sarah?" came a small, exhausted voice. "Is that you?" Sarah's throat closed with emotion. She knew that voice. "Kiva?" "Oh my God, Kiva, is that you?" "Yes, Miss Sarah, we came for you." All of us came. Tears poured down Sarah's face. "Who's we? Who's there with you?" "Me and Zeph and Nix." Kiva's voice shook with exhaustion and relief. "Sarah, Whisper, and Bounce. We all came. We came to bring you home." Sarah couldn't breathe. These children, these tiny, brave children, had somehow crossed the galaxy and dug through solid stone to reach her. How did you even find me? How did you get here?" "We had to. You helped us, so we help you. But you're just cubs. This journey, this digging, you could have died. You should never have." Sarah pressed her hand against the wall, wishing she could reach through and hold them. "You beautiful, brave, impossible children. I can't believe you did this." "We make hole bigger now," Kiva said. "Then you come through." Yes, let's make it bigger. I'll work from my side." Sarah attacked the hole with renewed energy. On the other side, she could hear the cubs digging as well, their claws scraping against the resistant processed stone. The hole grew slowly, widening from thumb size to fist size, then larger still. Hours passed. Sarah worked until her broken food tray finally snapped completely, leaving her with a sharp shard of metal. She used this like a chisel, hammering it against the stone with her fist. Her hands were bleeding, her knuckles raw, but she kept working. "Miss Sarah," Kiva called through the growing hole. When did you last eat? This morning. They bring food once a day. When did you last eat? Silence. Then few days ago, Sarah's heart clenched. Days? You haven't eaten in days? We ran out of food long time ago. We find water but not much food. As soon as this hole is big enough, I'm giving you my next meal. Don't argue. We're fine, Miss Sarah, we just need to get you out. But they weren't fine. Sarah could hear it in their voices, thin and weak. Could see it through the hole as it grew larger. The cubs looked terrible, thin to the point of starvation. Their fur matted and dull, their movements slow and pained. The hole was now the size of Sarah's head. She could see into the tunnel beyond, see the rough walls held up by improvised supports, see the cubs working in dim light from a chemical stick. They looked like they had been through war. Sarah, is that you? Sarah called, recognizing one of the cubs. What happened to your leg? It's okay, Miss Sarah, it doesn't hurt much. But Sarah could see it did hurt. Could see how the cub held the leg at an odd angle, how she bit her lip when she moved, and Whisper's breathing, that terrible rattling sound. Bounce's visible ribs, Zeph's mangled paw. These children had destroyed themselves to save her. We're going to get you all medical attention as soon as we're out, Sarah said firmly. No arguments. You need food, medicine, real care. First we get out, Kiva said practically. Then medicine. They worked through what Sarah guessed was the night, though time had no meaning in the prison. When the guards came to deliver her food, Sarah held her breath, terrified they would notice the hole. But the guard simply shoved the tray through the slot and left. As soon as the footsteps faded, Sarah grabbed the tray and pushed the food through the hole to the cubs. Eat, all of you. That's an order. She heard them divide the food, soft voices arguing about portions, then silence as they ate. It wasn't enough, nowhere near enough, but it was something. They resumed digging. The hole grew larger. Sarah could now fit her whole arm through, could reach into the tunnel and touch the cub's small paws. Those touches, brief contact with another living being after months of isolation, made Sarah cry. Finally, after another 12 hours of work, the hole was large enough. About 20 inches in diameter, barely sufficient for Sarah to squeeze through. She looked at the opening and made a decision. I'm coming through. Move back and give me room. Be careful, Miss Sarah, Kiva warned. The tunnel is not stable. Rocks fall sometimes. Sarah removed her uniform jacket and pushed it through the hole first, giving herself more room. Then she put her arms through and started pulling herself forward. The opening was painfully tight, scraping her shoulders and hips. The processed stone was rough, catching on her skin and clothes. She twisted her body, trying to angle through. For a terrible moment, she was stuck, trapped halfway through with stone pressing in from all sides. Panic flared, and she started to hyperventilate. Miss Sarah, breathe slowly. Whisper's soft voice came through the darkness. You can do it. Just breathe. Sarah forced herself to calm down, took a deep breath, and tried again. She felt small paws grab her arms and pull. The cubs were helping, using what little strength they had left to drag her through. Sarah pushed with her legs, scraped her back against the stone, and suddenly she was through. She tumbled into the tunnel, gasping, and found herself surrounded by 6 small cubs. They pressed against her, and Sarah wrapped her arms around as many as she could hold. They were so thin, so fragile, their hearts beating rapidly against her. You incredible, wonderful, brave children, Sarah whispered. You saved me. You actually saved me. Not saved yet, Kiva said, though she didn't pull away from the embrace. We still need to get out of prison. Sarah nodded, forcing herself to think clearly. She was free of her cell, but they were still deep inside Deephold prison. The guards would discover her missing during the next food delivery. They had maybe 12 hours before the alarm was raised. How far to the surface? She asked. Maybe 300 feet through the tunnel we dug, Zeph said. But it's not stable. We have to move slowly. And once we reach the surface? We need a ship, Nick said. We saw some at the service docks when we arrived. Sarah assessed their situation. 1 adult and 6 children, all of them weakened, some injured. No weapons, no tools, no allies. They had to cross 300 feet of unstable tunnel, steal a ship from a maximum security prison, and escape through a defensive perimeter designed to prevent exactly that. The odds were impossible. But then again, these cubs had already done the impossible by reaching her. Okay, Sarah said. Here's what we're going to do. Kiva leads because she knows the tunnel. I'll carry Sarah and anyone else who needs it. Everyone stays together. If the tunnel starts collapsing, we freeze and wait for it to settle. No heroics, no risks. We move carefully and we all survive. Understood. Understood, Miss Sarah, they chorused softly. Then let's go home. They began the long crawl back through the tunnel. Kiva led with the chemical light stick, its glow barely illuminating the rough passage. Sarah came next, carrying Sarah on her back. The small cub weighed almost nothing, her arms wrapped around Sarah's neck. The tunnel was even more unstable than Sarah had feared. Rocks shifted beneath their feet. Small pieces fell from the ceiling. In places, the passage was so narrow Sarah had to exhale completely to squeeze through. In others, the ceiling was so low they crawled on their bellies. They had gone maybe 100 feet when they heard voices echoing from behind. The guards had discovered the escape. Move faster, Sarah urged. But stay careful. They increased their pace, accepting greater risk. A section of ceiling collapsed behind them, filling the tunnel with dust and debris. They coughed and kept moving, the guards' shouts growing louder. Another collapsed, this one ahead of them. Nix grabbed Kiva before she walked into it, pulling her back just as rocks rained down. They had to dig through the fallen stone, precious minutes lost, the guards getting closer. Finally, they saw natural light ahead. The tunnel's end, opening into the lava caves on the asteroid's far side. They scrambled forward, emerging into the larger cavern. Behind them, they could hear the guards entering the tunnel. They're too big, Zeph said, glancing back. The tunnel is narrow. They'll have to dig to make it wider. That buys us time, Sarah said, but not much. To the surface, quickly. They ran through the caves using the natural passages the cubs had mapped on their way in. The asteroid's low gravity made movement easier but also more dangerous. One misstep could send them careening into walls. Sarah kept one hand on the cave wall for guidance, the other holding Sarah. They burst out of the cave mouth onto the asteroid's surface. Stars blazed overhead, harsh and unfiltered. The horizon curved sharply and Sarah could see the service docks in the distance, maybe half a mile away. Between them and the docks were sensor arrays. Patrol routes in open ground, we can't cross that, Nick said. The sensors will detect us immediately. What about the maintenance tunnels? Bounce asked. Like on the stations where we hid? Sarah looked at the nearby buildings. Deephold was a functional prison, not just cells. It had life support, power generation, waste management. All of those required maintenance access, yes, she said. We find an access point and go underground. They ran to the nearest cluster of buildings, staying low. Searchlights swept the area, and they had to freeze several times, pressing flat against the ground. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, expecting alarms to sound any moment. They found a maintenance hatch next to a power substation. Sarah pulled it open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Down, everyone down. The cubs scrambled down the ladder. Sarah went last, pulling the hatch closed above her. They found themselves in a maintenance tunnel, narrow but tall enough to walk upright. Emergency lights provided dim illumination. Pipes and conduits ran along the walls. Which way to the docks? Sarah asked. Zeph closed his eyes, using the same navigational sense that had guided them through space. He pointed right. That direction? Maybe half a mile through the tunnels. They moved as quickly as they dared. The tunnels branched and intersected, but Zeph seemed certain of the direction. Above them, they could hear alarms starting to wail. The entire prison was being mobilized. They emerged from the maintenance tunnels near the service docks. Sarah carefully opened an access hatch and peered out. The docks were busy even at this hour, with crews loading and unloading cargo. 3 ships were visible. 2 were small maintenance shuttles, probably limited range. The third was larger, a transport shuttle with a proper drive system. That was what they needed. The problem was the guards. At least 15 Creathian soldiers were visible, plus automated defenses. Sarah had no weapons, no way to fight. They would have to rely on speed and luck. We need a distraction, she said. Something to draw the guards away from that transport shuttle. I can do it, Bounce said immediately. Despite his weakness, his eyes were bright. I'm fast. I can trigger something on the other side of the docks. No, Sarah said firmly. You're exhausted. Someone else. Miss Sarah, I'm the fastest, Bounce insisted. Let me help. Please. Sarah looked at the small cub and saw determination that reminded her why she had crossed the galaxy to help the Velkari in the first place. These cubs had earned the right to make their own choices. Okay, she said, but you trigger the alarm and you run straight back here. No heroics. You hear me? Yes, Miss Sarah. Bounce slipped away, moving along the edge of the docking area. Sarah watched him go, her heart in her throat. The others clustered around her, all of them staring at the transport shuttle. An alarm blared from the far side of the docks, loud and insistent. Guards turned and ran toward it, shouting into communicators. The automated defenses swiveled toward the sound. For a moment, the area around the transport was less defended. "Now," Sarah said. "Run!" They sprinted across the open ground. Sarah carried Sarah and half-dragged Whisper, whose cough had worsened. Kiva, Zeph, and Nyx ran alongside, their small legs pumping. They covered the distance in seconds and reached the shuttle's boarding ramp. Sarah hit the emergency release. The ramp lowered with a hiss. They scrambled aboard just as guards noticed them and started shouting. Sarah made for the pilot's seat, her eyes scanning the Crethean control panel. She had trained on dozens of ship types, but never a Crethean military transport. The controls were different, designed for larger hands. She studied the layout frantically, identifying what she hoped were thrust controls and navigation systems. "Where's Bounce?" Sarah asked suddenly. Sarah's heart stopped. She looked out the viewport and saw the small cub running back across the docks. But guards were converging on him from two directions. He wasn't going to make it. Sarah's hands moved over the controls, trying to start the engines. Nothing happened. She tried a different sequence. Still nothing. "Security lockout," Zeph said, leaning over the console. "The ship knows we're not authorized." "Let me try." The small cub's claws danced over the panel, his damaged paw leaving small blood smears on the controls. He worked with fierce concentration, trying combination after combination. Outside, Bounce was still running. The guards were closing in, their weapons charging. "Come on," Sarah whispered. Come on, got it," Zeph exclaimed, and the engines hummed to life. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the thrust controls and pushed them forward. The shuttle lurched off its docking clamps and rose into the air. Guards scattered as the craft swung around, its engine wash knocking several off their feet. Sarah brought the shuttle down in a hover near where Bounce was running, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "Open the cargo door." Nyx hit the control. "The side door rolled open, wind rushing in. Bounce, jump," Sarah called. The small cub pushed off the ground with all his remaining strength. In the low gravity, he flew through the air toward the open door. For a terrible second, Sarah thought he would miss, would fall and be captured. Then Kiva's claws locked onto his scruff and she and the others pulled him inside. "Close the door," Sarah ordered. "Hold on." She pushed the throttle to maximum. The shuttle accelerated hard, throwing them all toward the back. Sarah fought the controls, pointing the nose up toward space. Alarms screamed as the prison's defense systems locked onto them. She saw weapons platforms tracking their movement. Missile launches detected on the screen. Sarah threw the shuttle into a hard turn, flying purely on instinct and training. A missile passed so close she could see it through the viewport. Another exploded ahead, and she had to bank sharply to avoid the debris. Energy beams lanced through space around them. One grazed the shuttle's hull, and more alarms added their voice to the chaos. Sarah ignored them all. Her world narrowed to the controls and the path ahead. She dropped into a field of debris left over from ancient mining operations, using the chunks of rock as cover. The shuttle's shields flashed as smaller pieces impacted. Sarah wove between the larger fragments, flying with precision born of desperation. Then they were through the defensive perimeter, accelerating away from the asteroid. Sarah kept pushing the engines, knowing they needed distance before Deephold organized a pursuit. In the back, the cubs were picking themselves up, checking on each other. Bounce was panting from his run but grinning. Sarah was crying, though whether from pain or relief Sarah couldn't tell. Whisper was coughing badly, his small body shaking. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah called. "We're alive," Kiva replied, and that was enough. Sarah checked the navigation system. They were deep in Crethean space, weeks from the nearest Federation outpost. The shuttle had fuel for maybe 3 days at standard speed. The entire Dominion fleet would be looking for them within hours. "Where do we go?" Zeph asked, joining her at the controls. Sarah studied the star map, thinking rapidly. They couldn't outrun military ships. They couldn't hide forever. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere the Cretheans wouldn't follow. Then she saw it. A notation on the map, a region marked as disputed territory. The border between Crethean and Federation space had several systems where both sides claimed sovereignty, but neither fully controlled. If they could reach one of those systems before being caught, they might find sanctuary. "There," she said, pointing. "The Helios system. Disputed territory. If we can make it there, we might find a Federation patrol." "That's 2 days away," Zeph said, checking the distance. "We have fuel for 3. It might work. Then that's where we go." Sarah set the course and engaged the autopilot. Then she finally allowed herself to turn and look at the cubs properly. They were gathered in a small group near the back of the shuttle, holding on to each other. They looked terrible, thin and injured and exhausted, but they were alive. They had done it. Sarah left the pilot seat and went to them. She knelt down and wrapped all 6 cubs in her arms, holding them as gently as she could. "You saved me," she whispered. "You brave, impossible, wonderful children. You crossed the galaxy and dug through stone and stole a ship. You saved my life." "You saved ours first," Kiva said simply. "You taught us to feed ourselves. You gave us hope. We just gave it back." They stayed like that for a long moment, human and aliens, teacher and students, friends who had proven that love could transcend species and cross any distance. In that moment, as they fled through space toward an uncertain future, they were a family. The next 2 days were tense. Sarah piloted the shuttle while the cubs rested, their bodies finally able to relax after months of hardship. She found medical supplies in the ship's emergency locker and treated their injuries as best she could. Sarah's leg needed surgery she couldn't provide, but she could at least clean and stabilize it. Whisper's cough required medication they didn't have, but she made him rest and breathe humid air from the life support system. She found food in the galley, proper food, and made the cubs eat slowly. Their stomachs had shrunk from months of starvation, and eating too much too quickly would make them sick. She prepared small portions every few hours, watching their thin bodies gradually accept nourishment. Twice they detected pursuit ships and had to alter course, hiding in asteroid fields and using the shuttle's limited stealth capabilities. Each time, Sarah's piloting skills kept them one step ahead. The cubs watched her work with wide eyes, seeing the competence they had always believed in now proven. On the morning of the 3rd day, they reached the Helios system. Sarah's hands were shaking as she brought them into the disputed zone, hoping desperately that a Federation patrol would be nearby. And there, like a miracle, a Federation destroyer appeared on sensors. Sarah opened all communication channels and transmitted an emergency beacon. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Federation Science Corps, broadcasting from a stolen Crethean shuttle. I am requesting immediate assistance and asylum. I repeat, immediate assistance." The destroyer altered course, moving to intercept. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she saw the familiar markings. "The Federation flag. Home. Shuttle, this is FSS Resolute. We copy your distress call. Are you in immediate danger? Negative, Resolute. But I have 6 Velkari cubs aboard who need medical attention urgently. Understood. Prepare for docking. We'll take care of you." 20 minutes later, the shuttle docked with the destroyer. As the airlock opened, Sarah and the cubs were met by the ship's medical team. The cubs were taken immediately to the medical bay, and Sarah went with them, refusing to leave their side. Over the next hours, the ship's doctor examined each cub, treating their injuries and malnourishment. Sarah's leg required surgery, which the doctor performed immediately. Whisper's lungs were damaged but would heal with proper care. All of them were severely underweight and dehydrated, but none of the damage was permanent. "They'll recover fully," the doctor told Sarah. "But it will take time, months probably. What they went through, no children should have to endure that." "No," Sarah agreed. "But they did it anyway, because they're the bravest people I've ever known." The Federation launched an immediate diplomatic protest with the Crethean Dominion over Sarah's unlawful imprisonment. The incident created a major diplomatic crisis, with both sides threatening to break treaties. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The Dominion would review its border policies and the Federation would increase protection for refugee populations. But Sarah didn't care about the politics. She only cared that she was free and that 6 cubs were safe. 2 weeks later, they arrived at a Federation station. The Velkari refugee community had been relocated there, given better facilities and more support. When Kiva, Zeph, Nick, Sarah, Whisper, and Bounce emerged from the medical bay, their families were waiting. The reunion was overwhelming. Parents and siblings who had thought the cubs were dead, who had mourned them for months, could now hold them again. There were tears and laughter and questions that would take days to answer. But through it all, the 6 cubs kept looking back at Sarah, and she kept watching them, a smile on her face. That evening, after the initial chaos had settled, Sarah sat with the cubs in a quiet observation lounge overlooking the stars. "What will you do now, Miss Sarah?" Kiva asked. "Keep working," Sarah said. "Keep helping. There are other refugee communities that need agricultural support, but I'll visit you all regularly, if that's okay with your families. They say you can visit any time, Bounce said. They say you're part of our family now. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. I'd like that very much. Will you teach us more? Sarah asked. About growing food? Of course. And anything else you want to learn. You've all proven you can do anything you set your minds to. They sat together watching the stars, 6 cubs and 1 human, bound by an adventure that would be told for generations. The story of children who crossed the galaxy and dug through stone because they refused to abandon someone who had shown them kindness. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the impossible odds or the dramatic escape. Not the diplomatic incidents or the political fallout. What mattered was that when someone needed help, 6 small cubs had said, "We will go." And 1 human had taught them that such courage was possible. They had saved each other. And in doing so, they had proven something fundamental about the universe. That love, determination, and hope could overcome any obstacle. That the smallest beings could accomplish the greatest deeds. And that sometimes the most important thing one person could do was show another that they mattered. The cubs eventually fell asleep in the lounge, exhausted but content. Sarah covered them with blankets and stayed nearby, watching over them. She thought about everything they had endured, everything they had sacrificed, and she made a silent promise. She would spend the rest of her life proving they hadn't been wrong to come for her. She would be worthy of their sacrifice. She would make sure their story inspired others to show the same courage, the same love, the same refusal to accept that anyone should be left behind. Because that's what the cubs had taught her. That's what humans had always known but sometimes forgot. That civilization wasn't measured by technology or military strength. It was measured by whether you helped those who needed it, by whether you cared when caring didn't make sense, by whether you dug through stone to save a friend. And these 6 small cubs, who had crossed the galaxy with nothing but determination and love, had shown her that some bonds were stronger than stone, deeper than space, and more enduring than any obstacle the universe could create. They had saved her life. And in doing so, they had reminded her why that life was worth saving.